The trouble started on a quiet Tuesday morning when the homeowner stepped outside to grab the mail. The sun was barely up, and the neighborhood was still calm, the way it always looked before the day truly began. Birds were chirping somewhere in the big tree across the street, and a dog barked softly in the distance. Everything felt normal, peaceful, predictable. But the moment the homeowner opened the mailbox, that feeling changed among the regular letters. There was a white envelope stamped with the bold letters, HOA notice. It looked official, stiff, and slightly threatening even before it was opened. The homeowner paused for a moment, wondering what it could be. They had always tried to follow the community rules. They kept the yard trimmed, never left trash outside, and painted the house only with approved colors. There was no reason to expect a problem. Still, curiosity won. The envelope was opened, and as the homeowner read the first sentence, their eyebrows slowly lifted. It said the lawn was out of compliance because the grass along one side of the yard was slightly uneven. Not even long, just uneven. The homeowner stared at the paper, confused. The grass had been cut 3 days earlier. It looked fine. Maybe it was a mistake. They shrugged, folded the letter, and went back inside. It wasn't worth worrying about. Maybe someone on the HOA board had made an error, or maybe the rule was misunderstood. It was something that could be fixed easily. That morning, the homeowner took an extra few minutes to trim the grass by hand. It felt unnecessary, but it seemed better than arguing. After all, this was just one letter, but it wasn't the last one. 3 days later, another envelope appeared in the mailbox. This one was more serious. It claimed the homeowner had left their trash bin outside past the approved hours. Once again, that didn't make sense. The bin had been brought back the same evening after the garbage truck came, just like every week. The homeowner felt irritation rising this time. 2 letters in 1 week. Something didn't feel right. They walked over to the bin and looked at it. It was tucked neatly against the side of the garage. Perfectly fine. The homeowner shook their head, feeling something unfamiliar, a sense of being watched. It wasn't a pleasant feeling. It felt like someone was waiting for them to slip up, even if they didn't slip at all. A few neighbors were out that morning, watering plants and walking their dogs. One neighbor waved. The homeowner considered asking whether others had received similar letters, but didn't want to sound dramatic. Maybe it really was a misunderstanding. Maybe the HOA was just doing some extra monitoring lately. So the homeowner kept quiet. Another few days passed. Then came the 3rd letter. This time, the notice claimed the mailbox did not match updated community standards. The homeowner nearly laughed at that one. The mailbox had been the same style for years, chosen from the approved options listed in the community packet. They'd selected it carefully, even double-checking with the previous HOA board. But now, the letter stated it needed to be replaced within 10 days or a fine would be issued. The homeowner felt frustration bubbling up in their chest. This wasn't coincidence anymore. 3 notices in less than 2 weeks, all about things that weren't actual issues, or things that had never been a problem before. Something was off. That evening, the homeowner walked around the neighborhood, looking at other mailboxes. Many were older, faded, or mismatched. Yet no one else seemed to be receiving warnings. People were chatting outside, trimming hedges, sipping drinks on their porches. Their mailboxes looked perfectly acceptable to the HOA, apparently. So why was the homeowner being singled out? Later that night, they sat at the kitchen table with all 3 letters spread out in front of them. The more they looked, the more confused they became. None of it made sense. They had always been quiet, respectful, and friendly. They kept to themselves but greeted neighbors kindly. They paid dues on time. They didn't cause trouble. So why was trouble coming to them? The next morning, they decided to approach the HOA office. It was a small building near the community park, with a glass door and a bulletin board outside. Notices of upcoming meetings, holiday events, and maintenance schedules were pinned neatly on the board. The homeowner walked inside. Holding the letters in one hand, a woman at the front desk looked up and smiled politely. But the smile felt practiced, almost automatic. The homeowner explained the situation calmly, showing the letters and asking if perhaps they had been sent in error. The woman listened, nodded here and there, then excused herself to speak with someone in a back office. Several minutes passed. When she returned, her expression was different, more stiff, more controlled, she said. The HOA stood by the notices. When the homeowner asked what part of the lawn, trash bin, or mailbox was out of compliance, she simply replied that they should review the community guidelines. It felt like a rehearsed answer, something she had said many times before. The homeowner tried again, asking for details so the issues could be fixed correctly. But the woman wouldn't say more. She only repeated that the homeowner needed to follow the rules. As the homeowner walked back home, a strange feeling settled in. It wasn't anger, not yet. It was something colder, something uneasy. The HOA had never behaved this way before. In the past, if there was a small issue, they would send a friendly reminder or even stop by and talk. But now the tone was different, sharp, impersonal, almost hostile. By the time the homeowner returned home, their frustration had grown. They went inside, poured a glass of water, and sat down to think. Maybe they were imagining things. Maybe they were overreacting. But deep down, a little voice whispered that something was wrong. Ignoring it wouldn't make it disappear. 2 more days passed quietly. The homeowner made sure everything outside was perfect. The yard neat, the trash bin stored early, the walkway swept. They even polished the mailbox, just in case someone was watching. They didn't want to give the HOA any excuse for another letter. On Friday morning, they stepped outside once more, and there it was. Another envelope. This one was thicker. A fine had been issued. The homeowner stared at the paper, reading it twice, then a third time. The fine was for multiple unresolved violations. It claimed the homeowner had ignored previous notices, which wasn't true, and stated that additional penalties would follow if payment wasn't made within 7 days. The homeowner felt a wave of helpless anger. They hadn't ignored anything. They had tried to fix the issues. They had even gone to the HOA office. Yet it didn't matter. The letters kept coming anyway. That afternoon, while taking a short walk to clear their head, the homeowner overheard 2 neighbors talking quietly near the mailbox cluster. The words were soft, but the tone said enough. One of them mentioned the homeowner's name, saying something about another notice, and maybe they should have known better. The homeowner pretended not to hear and kept walking, but inside, something tightened. News was spreading. The HOA wasn't just sending letters, they were shaping how others saw them. Later that same day, as the homeowner was sweeping the porch, an older neighbor approached. She hesitated at first, glancing around before speaking quietly. She said she had noticed the letters and wanted to say that the same thing had happened to someone else a year earlier. She didn't say much, only that the HOA had a way of picking certain people. Then she gently told the homeowner to be careful and walked away. That short conversation stayed on the homeowner. If others had been targeted before, then this wasn't random. It was a pattern, cycle, a quiet problem no one wanted to speak about openly. And now, the homeowner was caught in it. Over the next 2 days, things felt different. Every time the homeowner walked outside, they felt eyes on them, not necessarily judging, but curious. The kind of attention no one wants. Some neighbors gave sympathetic looks. Others pretended not to notice. The homeowner didn't blame them. No one wanted trouble with the HOA, but the homeowner wasn't ready to give up. They gathered the letters again, arranged them in order, and began writing down everything: dates, times, what they had done to fix each issue. They took photos of the yard, the trash bin placement, the mailbox. They even recorded the time the garbage truck passed by. They didn't know exactly why they were documenting everything yet, but something told them they needed proof. Something bigger was happening, and they needed to be prepared. That night, as they sat at the table, looking at the growing stack of papers and pictures, they felt a mix of fear and determination. This wasn't just about a lawn or a mailbox anymore. It was about being treated fairly. It was about standing up, even quietly, when something didn't feel right. And deep inside, the homeowner knew something else. This wasn't the end. It was only the beginning of a fight they never asked for. A fight they weren't sure they were ready for, but one they couldn't avoid anymore. They didn't know it yet. But the situation was about to take a turn no one in the neighborhood could have predicted. The homeowner woke up the next morning hoping things might calm down. Maybe the HOA would stop sending letters. Maybe it was all a mix-up that would sort itself out. But deep down, they knew better. The tension in the neighborhood felt heavier than before, like the air carried something unspoken. Even the birds outside seemed quieter, as if they sensed the unrest. When the homeowner stepped outside to check the mailbox, they did it with hesitation, almost afraid of what might be waiting inside. Their hands shook slightly as they opened the metal door. At first, all they saw was a grocery flyer and a small package. For a moment, relief washed over them. But when they lifted the pile, a thin white envelope slipped from the back and fell onto the ground. Another HOA notice. The homeowner picked it up slowly. Their hearts sank as they opened it. This one said they needed to attend a mandatory compliance meeting. Claimed their violations needed to be discussed in person, and failure to attend could lead to further action. The wording felt cold and sharp, nothing like the friendly, reasonable tone the HOA used to have years ago. The meeting was scheduled for the upcoming Wednesday evening. That gave the homeowner just 5 days. 5 days to prepare, worry, or maybe even find a way to understand what was happening. The rest of the day felt different. Every little task, even washing dishes or folding laundry, was overshadowed by that meeting notice lying on the kitchen table. It felt like a weight pressing down, reminding the homeowner that trouble was coming. Around lunchtime, the doorbell rang. The homeowner hesitated, wondering who it might be. When they opened the door, they found their next-door neighbor standing outside. He looked uneasy, shifting slightly on his feet, like he wasn't sure if he should be there. He said he had heard about the letters. The homeowner didn't remember telling anyone, so the news must have spread faster than expected. The neighbor spoke quietly, glancing toward the street before saying he had once received a letter. Just like the homeowners, he explained that he tried to defend himself. But the HOA kept adding more fines until he finally gave up and paid them. He warned the homeowner to be careful, then stepped back and sighed as if he had said too much. Without waiting for a reply, he walked off, leaving the homeowner with even more questions after he left. The homeowner stood at the doorway thinking about his words. There was something in his voice, a mix of fear and resignation. It didn't sound like someone who got a fair chance. It sounded like someone who gave up because he didn't know what else to do. The homeowner didn't want to end up like that. Later that afternoon, the homeowner decided to take another careful walk around the neighborhood. Not to confront anyone, but just to observe. They noticed things they hadn't paid attention to before. A house on the corner had a fence that was cracked, but there was no HOA sticker or notice on their door. Another house had weeds growing between their driveway stones, yet no one seemed to care. A mailbox down the street was leaning slightly, rust on the bottom, but again, no signs of warnings. The more the homeowner looked, the more obvious it became that the rules weren't being enforced equally. Some houses had visible issues, others didn't. But none of them had received the kind of pressure the homeowner was experiencing. As the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the street, the homeowner headed toward the community park. It was usually a place where kids played and adults walked their dogs. But today it was empty. The swings moved slightly in the wind, making a soft, squeaking sound. The emptiness made the homeowner feel isolated. A community wasn't supposed to feel like this. On the way back, they noticed someone standing near their yard, a woman who lived 2 houses down. She pretended to look at her phone as the homeowner walked by. But her eyes lifted for a moment, and there was a faint look of sympathy in them. She didn't say anything. But the homeowner felt a strange comfort, knowing not everyone was avoiding them. As the days passed and the meeting approached, the homeowner began gathering everything they could: photos, timestamps, copies of letters, even notes about conversations. They kept everything in a folder. It felt strange preparing for a meeting, like it was a court case. But something inside told them they would need proof. On Tuesday afternoon, the older neighbor who had warned them earlier approached again. She came quietly, almost cautiously, as if she didn't want anyone to notice. She whispered that the homeowner should watch out for the HOA president. She didn't say why, but the warning had a seriousness that made the homeowner's stomach twist. Before the homeowner could ask more, she walked away quickly, glancing over her shoulder. That night, the homeowner sat in bed, staring at the ceiling. The house was silent, except for the faint hum of the refrigerator. But their mind wasn't still. They kept replaying everything: the letters, the strange behavior, the warnings from neighbors. Each thought made the upcoming meeting feel more intimidating. On the day of the meeting, the sky was gray and cloudy. It felt fitting, almost like the weather knew something unpleasant was coming. The homeowner spent the morning checking their documents again, making sure everything was in order. They ate a small lunch, though they barely tasted it. Nervousness kept their appetite away. As evening approached, the homeowner dressed simply and left the house with the folder in hand. The walk to the HOA office felt longer than usual. The neighborhood seemed unusually quiet, and the air had a chilly stillness. When the homeowner reached the office, a few other people were arriving too. But none of them made eye contact. Inside, the meeting room was small, with a long table placed in the center. Several members of the HOA board sat behind it, including the president. The president was a tall, stern-looking person with a stiff posture and a fixed expression that didn't seem friendly at all. The homeowner had seen them around before, but never this close. Something about their presence felt overpowering. The homeowner sat in the chair across from them. The president began by reading the list of supposed violations in a tone that sounded rehearsed, almost mechanical. Each item was said as if it were an undeniable fact, even though the homeowner knew they had evidence proving otherwise. When the homeowner tried to speak, the president cut them off quickly, saying they needed to save questions for the end. That made the homeowner even more uneasy. How could they explain anything if they couldn't speak? After the president finished reading, they folded their hands and stared across the table. The room felt heavy, as though everyone was waiting for the homeowner to admit to something they didn't do. When the homeowner finally got a chance to talk, they spoke slowly and carefully. They explained each situation one by one, showing photos and dates. But as they talked, they noticed the board members weren't really listening. Some of them were looking at their phones. Others exchanged glances that looked disinterested or impatient. Only one board member, a quiet person sitting at the end of the table, seemed to pay attention. They didn't say anything, but their eyes stayed fixed on the homeowner with a look that seemed thoughtful. When the homeowner finished, the president leaned back and sighed, as though the explanation had been an inconvenience. They said the board would review the matter, but the tone suggested the decision had already been made even before the meeting began. The homeowner walked home feeling drained. The night air felt cold against their skin. Their footsteps echoed on the sidewalk, each one sounding heavier than the last. Nothing about the meeting felt fair. It felt like they had walked into a room where their voice didn't matter. When they reached home, they sat on the couch and stared at the wall for a long moment. The house felt strangely silent again. The lights hummed softly overhead. Even though they had tried to defend themselves, it didn't seem to make a difference. But something had changed inside them. They weren't defeated. They were frustrated, tired, and confused, but not defeated. If anything, the meeting made the homeowner more certain that something was wrong with the way the HOA operated. Later that night, the quiet board member who had paid attention during the meeting sent a message. It was short and simple. It said the homeowner should keep all their records safe and not give up. It also said the homeowner wasn't the only one who had been treated this way, and that things might be changing soon. The homeowner read the message twice, feeling a spark of hope. Someone on the inside had noticed the unfairness. Someone was watching, maybe even waiting for the right moment to speak up, for the first time in days. The homeowner felt a little less alone. The next morning, they woke up with a renewed sense of focus. Whatever was happening, they were going to face it, and they were beginning to realize that the fight ahead might be bigger than just a few letters. It might be the beginning of exposing something that had been hidden for far too long. The morning after the meeting felt strangely different. The homeowner woke up with a tired heaviness in their chest, but also a quiet determination that hadn't been there before. Something in them had shifted the moment they received that late-night message from the board member. It was the first real sign that maybe they weren't imagining things. Maybe someone else saw the unfairness too. The house was quiet as the homeowner made a cup of tea. The steam rose slowly, swirling in the still air. They sat at the kitchen table, staring out the window at their yard. Everything looked normal: the trimmed grass, the clean walkway, the neatly placed trash bin. Anyone passing by would think everything was peaceful. But inside the homeowner's mind, a storm was building. The message from the board member replayed in their head: keep all your records safe. Things may change soon. What did that mean? Did the board member know something the homeowner didn't? Was someone inside the HOA watching what was happening? Or maybe the unfair treatment wasn't just towards them. Maybe others had suffered the same way as they thought about it. The homeowner remembered the quiet warnings from neighbors, hints about past problems, stories mentioned only in whispers. Those comments felt different now. They weren't random. They were signs. Signs the homeowner hadn't picked up on before, for the first time in weeks. Instead of feeling intimidated, the homeowner felt curious. Maybe there was a pattern behind everything, and the only way to uncover it was to talk to people later that day. The homeowner decided to take another walk through the neighborhood. Not to escape stress this time, but to talk to others. They started with the older neighbor who had warned them earlier. She lived in a house with green shutters and a small porch covered with potted plants. When the homeowner knocked on her door, she opened it slowly, her expression cautious. The homeowner didn't want to make her uncomfortable, so they spoke gently. They said they were trying to understand why the HOA acted the way it did, and asked if she knew anything more. The older neighbor hesitated for a long moment, then stepped outside and closed the door behind her. It was as if she didn't want anyone inside her house to overhear. Or maybe she didn't want someone outside to listen through the windows. Her voice was soft when she finally spoke. She said that years ago she had received several letters similar to the homeowners. They came one after another, each one more aggressive than the last. She said she tried to fight back, but the HOA threatened to take legal action. She didn't have money to fight, so she gave in and paid the fines even though they weren't fair. She mentioned that the president at that time was the same one currently in charge. Then she lowered her voice further, saying some people believe the president liked having control over others. Her words made the homeowner's stomach twist. This wasn't just random targeting. It had happened before. After she went back inside, the homeowner kept walking. They approached another neighbor, the one who had warned them to be careful days earlier. He was watering his small garden when the homeowner came by. When the homeowner brought up the HOA situation, he put the watering can down and wiped his hands on his pants. He looked conflicted, as if he wanted to speak but didn't want to get involved. Eventually, he sighed and admitted that he had received several strange letters a year earlier. He said he tried to question them, but each time he did, the HOA added another fine. He explained that he didn't have the energy to fight, so he changed everything they told him to change. Even then, the letters continued until he finally paid a large fine and the issue stopped. The homeowner asked if he thought they were being targeted. The neighbor shrugged helplessly. He said it felt like some people were chosen and others weren't, but no one knew why. He also said many people in the neighborhood were scared of challenging the HOA because once you were on their list, you never knew what would happen next. Hearing these stories gave the homeowner a strange mix of emotions: sadness, frustration, and a growing sense of responsibility. If this had happened to others, and no one ever spoke up, maybe that's why the HOA felt so confident doing it again. Maybe silence was what gave them power. The homeowner walked further down the street, passing several houses they hadn't talked to yet. At one house, a couple stood near their driveway. The homeowner approached gently and asked if they had time to talk. At first, they looked confused, but when the homeowner mentioned the HOA letters, their faces changed. The couple invited the homeowner to their porch and shared their own story. They said the HOA had once fined them for having a flower bed that did not meet approval, even though they had received approval months earlier. When they tried to show the paperwork, the HOA claimed the approval form didn't exist. The couple said they eventually dug up the flowers to avoid more trouble. As the homeowner walked away, they felt a heaviness inside. There were too many stories for this to be coincidence. Something was very wrong with the way the HOA operated. While walking back home, the homeowner saw someone waving from across the street. It was a neighbor they didn't know well, someone who mostly kept to himself. He asked if the homeowner had time to talk. They nodded. He walked over. He said he had overheard part of the meeting the other night because he lived close to the office. He said he couldn't hear everything, but he heard enough to know the president was frustrated that the homeowner was asking too many questions. That made the homeowner pause. Asking questions wasn't wrong. Why would the president be bothered by that? The neighbor also said that years ago, a small group of homeowners had tried to challenge the HOA's decisions, but they eventually backed down because the board made things difficult for them. He didn't know all the details, but he remembered how tense the neighborhood felt back then, by the time the homeowner returned home. They realized something important. They weren't the first to face this. The HOA's actions weren't mistakes. They were part of a long pattern of intimidation and unequal rule enforcement. That night, the homeowner sat at the kitchen table again, this time with a growing pile of notes from the conversations they'd had. They added them to the folder with the letters and photos. The folder was getting thick. It didn't look like a simple misunderstanding anymore. It looked like evidence. As they sat there, their phone buzzed. It was another message from the same board member who had messaged the night before. This time, the message was longer. It said the homeowner should be careful because the president had asked the board to keep an eye on them. It also said that the president didn't like when residents questioned the board's decisions. And finally, the message said that several board members had noticed inconsistencies in the HOA's finances recently. The homeowner's heart started pounding. Finances. What did that mean? Were the fines being used incorrectly? Was there something bigger happening behind the scenes? They wrote back, asking what kind of inconsistencies the board member meant. The response came slowly. The board member said they couldn't explain everything yet, but there were rumors that money collected from fines wasn't always going where it was supposed to go. They didn't provide details, only that the homeowner should keep their documents safe because something important might come to light soon. The homeowner stared at the message, feeling a strange mix of fear and curiosity. If money was involved, that changed everything. It meant this wasn't just about control or power, it might be about something deeper. The next morning, the homeowner woke up with a different kind of energy. Instead of feeling overwhelmed, they felt focused. They spent hours organizing the folder, arranging documents in order, highlighting important parts, and printing copies of photos. They weren't doing it out of fear. They were doing it because they knew something was coming. Later in the afternoon, the homeowner saw the quiet board member walking near the park. They approached cautiously. The board member looked tense, as if they were constantly checking to see if someone was watching. When the homeowner thanked them for the messages, the board member nodded, but didn't smile. They said things were getting complicated, and that some board members were starting to question the president's decisions. The homeowner asked if that meant the board was planning to take action. The board member didn't answer directly. Instead, they said the homeowner's situation had opened the eyes of a few people. They also said the president didn't like losing control and that things might get tense before they got better. As the sun began to set, the homeowner walked back home with a new sense of purpose. Everything felt connected now. The letters, the meeting, the neighbors' stories, the warnings, and the rumors about finances. What started as a few unfair notices had grown into something much bigger. Something that involved not just one house, but the entire community. Something that had been quietly hurting people for years, and now, for the first time, someone was finally starting to push back. The homeowner didn't know exactly what was coming next. They didn't know how big the fight would get or what the president was planning. But they knew one thing with absolute certainty. They were no longer standing alone. Something was building beneath the surface, something that was about to expose the truth, and whatever happened next would change everything. He woke up the next morning with a strange mix of hope and worry sitting in his chest. The big meeting with the HOA was only a few days away, and even though he kept telling himself to stay calm, he knew this meeting could change everything. Either the board would finally admit they'd handled things unfairly, or they would double down and try to push him even harder. The uncertainty felt like a weight on his shoulders. He spent the early hours walking around his yard, looking at the fence, the lawn, the spot where the HOA claimed he had violated some rule that didn't even exist. He remembered every letter they had mailed him, every warning, every fine. At one point he stood still and asked himself out loud why a simple place to live had turned into such a battlefield. He had moved to this neighborhood because he imagined peace, people who minded their own business, and a safe environment. Instead, he felt like he had accidentally joined some strange competition he never agreed to enter. Around noon, he sat at the small table in his kitchen and tried to prepare himself for the coming days. He wrote a few notes, though he wasn't sure he'd even use them. He didn't want to walk into that meeting sounding like someone memorizing lines. He wanted to speak honestly. He wanted them to understand how draining this whole situation had become. But he also wanted to show he was not someone they could push around. Later in the day, he got a visit from his neighbor across the street. The neighbor had lived there far longer than he had and knew the HOA much better. He walked over with a quiet, understanding smile. The moment he stepped inside, he sat down and let out a long breath that seemed as tired as the homeowner's own. He said he had heard how the board had been treating him and wanted to offer some advice. He said the HOA had a habit of testing new residents, trying to see how far they could go before someone pushed back. Not everyone was treated this way, but it happened just enough that people whispered about it. Sometimes the board backed off when someone stood their ground. Other times, they tried to make things as messy as possible. It wasn't fair. It wasn't right. It was something that happened. Hearing this made the homeowner feel both validated and angry. He wasn't imagining things. But he also felt a small sense of fear. What if the HOA didn't back down? What if they made life difficult for a long time? He didn't want to spend every year fighting rules that didn't matter. The neighbor assured him he wasn't alone. A few people had faced similar issues before, but most didn't want to talk about it. They just tried to stay quiet and get through it. That was what the HOA counted on: silence. The neighbor said that if the homeowner spoke clearly and refused to show fear, the board might rethink their approach. Bullies liked easy targets. They avoided problems when the person pushed back in the right way. After the neighbor left, the homeowner felt a little more prepared, but he was still nervous. He spent the evening walking around the house, not doing anything specific, just moving, thinking, and trying to keep his mind steady. He didn't want to walk into that meeting full of anger. He wanted to be firm, calm, clear, but inside, he kept imagining all the worst-case scenarios. The day before the meeting arrived faster than he expected. He woke up early again, made tea, and sat quietly by the window. He watched people walking their dogs, kids riding their bikes, cars leaving for work. It was a normal morning for everyone else. But he felt like he was preparing for something much bigger. He spent part of the morning reviewing the HOA handbook again. He looked at the sections that supposedly applied to him, and he read every sentence carefully. The more he read, the more it became obvious that the HOA had been reaching, twisting things or simply making up rules as they went along. That gave him confidence. He had facts. He had logic. He had proof. But deep down, he knew that facts didn't always win when pride was involved. And the HOA board seemed to have a lot of pride. Later that afternoon, another neighbor stopped by a woman who had watched everything unfold from a distance. She wasn't the kind of person who liked trouble, but she believed in fairness. She handed him a small folder with a few printed pages. They were old HOA notices from 2 years ago, where someone else had been accused of the same violation, even though that person hadn't broken any rules either. That homeowner eventually moved away, but the notices showed a clear pattern. He thanked her and promised he would keep her name private. She said she didn't want to get involved directly. She believed he had a better chance of standing up to the board than most people did. She wished him luck and walked away quickly, looking over her shoulder as if someone might see her helping him. That alone told him everything he needed to know about how much power the HOA tried to hold over people. That night, he barely slept. Every time he closed his eyes, he imagined himself sitting in that meeting room, surrounded by people who were determined to show their authority. He imagined them using their usual sharp tone, their clipped sentences, their stern expressions. But he also imagined himself staying calm, answering clearly, and refusing to be intimidated. When the morning of the meeting finally arrived, he got dressed carefully. Not too formal, not too casual. Just enough to show that he took the situation seriously without trying to look aggressive. He checked himself in the mirror once before walking out the door. His heartbeat was loud in his chest, but he took a deep breath and reminded himself that he wasn't doing anything wrong. He had nothing to hide. He simply wanted to protect his home as he walked toward the community hall. He saw a couple of neighbors watching from their porches. Some gave him quiet nods of support. Others looked away, unsure if they wanted to be connected to the situation. It made him feel both supported and lonely at the same time. He reached the doors of the hall and paused. The board members were already inside. He could hear their voices. He took one last breath and stepped in. The room was arranged with a long table where the board members sat, facing a single chair where he was expected to sit, as if he were standing trial. The setup felt deliberate, like they wanted to send a message. They were in control. But he didn't let himself react. He walked to the chair, sat down calmly, and placed his notes in his lap. The board members looked at him with their usual stern faces. The president of the board leaned forward and started speaking, listing all the supposed violations again. The tone was sharp, and the words felt rehearsed. But this time, something was different. The homeowner didn't look nervous. He didn't shrink back. He listened quietly, waiting for his turn to speak. When they finally asked if he had anything to say, he nodded and took a slow breath. He explained clearly that none of the accusations matched the actual rules in the handbook. He showed them each section they claimed he had violated and explained how the rule didn't apply. He showed them the folder of old notices that proved they had done similar things before. And for the first time, board members shifted uncomfortably in their seats. One of them tried to interrupt, but he stayed firm. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't get angry. He spoke like someone who understood his rights and wasn't afraid to use them. By the time he finished, the room felt completely different. The board members were no longer acting confident. They whispered among themselves, flipping through papers, avoiding eye contact. For the first time, he felt he had the upper hand, but he didn't know the twist that was still waiting for him, something that would shake the entire neighborhood and reveal the real reason behind everything the HOA had been doing. The board members whispered among themselves for a long moment, their faces tight and uneasy. The homeowner sat quietly in his chair, hands resting on the notes he had brought with him. For a second, the room felt frozen in time. Everyone seemed to be waiting for something, some truth, some decision, some shift. Finally, the board president cleared his throat. His voice was still firm, but it no longer carried that same sharp confidence as before. He said the board needed a short break to review the homeowner's points. Without waiting for a response, he stood up and motioned for the other board members to follow him to the side of the room. The homeowner stayed seated. He didn't move. He didn't want to show any sign of nervousness, even though he felt a strange mix of relief and tension. Part of him wanted to walk out, go home, and forget this whole chapter of his life. But he needed to see it through. He needed to understand why this had even happened in the first place. The board huddled together, talking quietly. Every now and then, one of them glanced over at him. He didn't look away. He didn't try to hide the fact that he was watching them. He wanted them to see he wasn't afraid. After several minutes, they returned to their seats. The atmosphere was different now. The president sat down slowly, as if he was preparing to say something he didn't want to say. The others followed. Avoiding eye contact, the president began by saying the board had reviewed the evidence and reconsidered their earlier decisions. He said the fines would be removed, the warnings would be withdrawn, and the homeowner would no longer be considered in violation of any rules. He said the board appreciated the homeowner's cooperation and hoped to move forward peacefully, but the homeowner could hear the hesitation, the pressure behind their words. It didn't sound like a board making a fair correction. It sounded like a group being cornered. Something was being held back, and he wanted to know what. Before the board could close the meeting, he asked calmly why the HOA had targeted him in the first place. His voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the room clearly. He said he understood mistakes could happen, but this wasn't a mistake. This was persistent. This was deliberate. And he wanted the real reason behind it. The board members froze again. The president shifted uncomfortably. The treasurer kept staring down at the table. The secretary tapped her fingers nervously on a stack of papers. None of them seemed ready to answer. When it became obvious that they weren't going to speak, the homeowner stood up slowly. He didn't raise his voice. He simply said he knew they had pushed him harder than they pushed other residents. He said he knew they had been waiting for him to back down. And he said if they weren't willing to explain their behavior openly, then he would take things further. The board president looked up sharply and asked what he meant. The homeowner told them he had already spoken with a housing advocate. He explained that he planned to file a formal complaint if the board didn't explain the truth behind their actions. He said he didn't want to fight for the sake of fighting, but he wasn't going to let this situation be swept under the rug. The room grew tense. A long silence filled the space. Finally, something cracked. It wasn't the president who spoke. It wasn't the treasurer or the secretary. It was one of the board members who rarely talked at meetings. He looked tired in a way that made the homeowner realize this man had been carrying a heavy secret. He said he wanted to speak honestly. The president tried to interrupt, but he kept talking. He said he didn't agree with what the board had done. He said not everyone on the board had approved of the pressure placed on the homeowner. And then he revealed something no one in that room expected. He said the board president had been trying to buy several homes in the community. The HOA was planning a big redevelopment project, something they had kept quiet about because it wasn't officially approved yet. The president wanted specific houses in specific spots, ones he believed would be valuable when the new plan rolled out. And the homeowner's property was one of those homes. The goal wasn't really about violations. It wasn't about rules. It wasn't about community standards. It was about pushing the homeowner until he got tired enough to sell. The homeowner felt the air leave his lungs for a moment. He just stood there, stunned. He had suspected something strange, but not this. Not something so calculated. He looked at the president, who wouldn't meet his eyes. The secretary looked shaken. The treasurer looked guilty. The board member who spoke looked relieved, as if he had finally let go of a burden he had been carrying for too long. The homeowner asked if the project was approved. The board member said no. It was still in early planning, but the president had been preparing for it, hoping to get as many ideal properties under his control before anyone else found out. The homeowner sat back down. For the first time during this whole ordeal, he felt a calm come over him, not the calm of defeat, but the calm of someone who finally understood the truth. He asked the board directly why they thought they could treat him like that, why they thought he would simply give in, why they believed people could be pushed around without consequences. The president didn't respond. Instead, the board member who had spoken apologized. He said he knew it wasn't enough. He said he was tired of watching residents get stressed and pressured because of decisions that didn't come from a place of fairness. He said he regretted not speaking up sooner. The homeowner thanked him, not because he felt grateful for what had happened, but because honesty in that room finally had a place. The board president tried to regain control of the meeting, but it was too late. The truth had already shifted the room. The homeowners who were quietly watching in the back began whispering. Someone even stood up and asked the board how many other people had been pressured. Others began murmuring among themselves. The president looked overwhelmed. He claimed everything had been done for the good of the community, but no one was listening to him anymore. The meeting ended with chaos, but not the type of chaos the homeowner feared. It was a chaos of awakening. People who had once been silent now questioned things openly. Some asked for the president to resign. Others suggested forming a new committee to investigate the board's decisions. A few even walked up to the homeowner and apologized on behalf of the neighborhood when he finally left the hall. He felt lighter than he had in months. The sky outside looked brighter. The air felt fresher, and for the first time, felt proud of himself not for winning, but for standing up. Over the next few weeks, things changed quickly. The board president stepped down quietly. A temporary committee was formed to review the HOA's practices. Residents who had stayed silent began attending meetings again. Even the board member who had spoken the truth publicly resigned, saying he wanted the community to choose someone they could trust more. The homeowner didn't run for any position. He didn't want power. He didn't want to control anything. He just wanted peace. But he did attend the meetings, not as someone fighting back, but as someone who wanted fairness to stay alive in the community. People in the neighborhood began to greet him differently. Not with sympathy, but with respect. They knew he had stood alone against something that had frightened many of them for years. They knew he had changed things without shouting, threatening, or giving in. One evening, as he sat on his porch, watching the sun dip behind the houses, he realized something important. The whole experience had taught him that silence sometimes gives power to the wrong people. But calm resistance, clear words, the courage to ask for truth could change things more than anyone expected. He also realized that the shocking twist wasn't just the secret redevelopment plan. It wasn't just the pressure the board president had tried to hide. The real twist was that the quiet homeowner, someone the board thought would break first, ended up being the one who broke the cycle of fear in the entire community. He leaned back in his chair, listening to the sounds of kids playing nearby, the low hum of conversations, and the peaceful air that finally felt like home again. It wasn't the fight he wanted. It wasn't a chapter he enjoyed living through, but it was one he conquered with patience, truth, and strength he didn't even know he had until the moment he needed it. And now he could finally breathe freely.